Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Field Facts with Forrest. I'm your host, Forrest Carpenter, and today we're going to talk about how to hunt out of A-frame blinds. All right. So our question today comes from Derek King, and he's asking, in general, how do you hunt out of A-frames? What do you use for spreads? Why would I want to use an A-frame? What do you recommend? And can you use them in the middle of a field? So we're going to cover all those questions today and make sure that we tell you everything you need to know for hunting out of an A-frame blind. First off, we're going to talk about some pros and cons. Okay, there's a lot of great things about A-frame blinds, and we're going to go ahead and list those off. First off, you can hunt out of an A-frame almost anywhere. There's very few situations where you couldn't get away with hunting out of an A-frame blind, and really, you could probably make it work anywhere if you really want to and you get it brushed up well enough. Okay, another thing that's really nice about them, they're comfortable for everybody of every age and pretty much any size, as to where layout blinds and ghillie blankets and chairs can be very difficult for people to hide out of, especially if you're really young, really old, or a bigger guy. They can be very difficult and very limiting, make shooting difficult. A-frame blinds are very conducive to people like that. You can sit in a lawn chair if you'd like. All you got to do is stand up and shoot. And the way some of them are built, you don't even have to stand up as long as you're in a safe scenario and you're not going to be doing anything dangerous and everyone's on the same page. So they work very well for just about everyone. And another thing, when we think about hunting with little kids, it conceals motion easily. So if you're taking a kid hunting, it's a great way. They can be in there kind of moving around a little bit. And for the most part, aside from directly above, while they're moving around, their movement's going to be concealed. You can still have those sneaky, quiet geese show up, and all of a sudden they're on the edge of your spread and they're committed. You can kind of reach over there, grab Timmy by the arm, hand him his little single shot 410, and tell him to get ready for the geese that are coming in. So there's a lot of advantages there. The other nice thing, again, whether you're young or old, they are awesome in the cold. When it comes to your miserable, rainy, sleet, snow, icy, miserably cold and windy days, those A-frames are going to give you a nice barrier of protection. You're going to have a nice wall between you and the elements. You can have a heater in there to keep your hands warm, keep the dogs warm. It's really, really comfortable. Okay, so A-frame blinds are wonderful, and they're really a great way to hunt. Now, there are a few downsides to them, but for the most part, the goods outweigh the bads. So let's cover some of those cons, all right? So they are bulky, and they can be tough to carry, especially if you leave them grassed up. Now, to leave them grassed, to regrass them every time you hunt, that's kind of the big question, and it's difficult for a lot of people. Most people will leave a base layer of grass in there throughout the season and touch it up every morning or afternoon that you go out and hunt and use them. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure that you can fit your darn blind back in your truck or your trailer after the hunt. So they are difficult to carry, and they're not great for hiking a long way. All right. Another thing is they do have an inherently high profile. That's just how it is. You got a tall blind, especially early in the morning and late in the evening. Those blinds are going to cast a big, long shadow, sometimes even a couple 100 yards long, depending on the terrain that you're hunting next to. So keep that in mind. If you've got the sun behind you, you don't typically want to cast a shadow on your decoys. I know a lot of guys really don't like putting shadows on decoys, so you got to be thinking about that as well. Now, one of the other things that gets to be a pain, I'm going to go in depth here in just a minute, is brushing. I'm not going to spend too much time on it right now because I'm going to turn around and talk about it in just a second. But the last point that I want to cover as far as a downside for an A-frame blind is safety. Now, not that they're inherently unsafe, but you do have to take some extra precautions to make sure, especially with a dog or a little one in the blind, that you're being safe with your guns, because most of those rails in the front where you rest your guns don't have much, or what they do have isn't sufficient for keeping your guns safely pointed in a vertical direction, aside from anything else. And again, the most important thing in any kind of hunting is being safe. So when you've got the dog running back and forth, or kids moving around, bumping the frame of the blind, those guns are very likely to slide off. And whether they're unsafe or not, we all know stories of guns that have gone off and either hurt someone or almost severely hurt someone. So keep that in mind. We always want to stay safe out there. Now, back to brushing your blinds. When we're brushing these blinds, we're not just trying to break up the outline a little bit or just kind of break up the camo pattern that's on that material. When you brush these things, you want it to look like a bush. You don't want to be able to see the blind itself at all. It shouldn't look like a blind. It should look like a giant pile of tumbleweeds, grass, cane, anything you've got in your area that you're trying to either match or trying to create in the middle of a field somewhere. So when you're putting all this stuff together, you've got to make sure that you have more than enough material to go around. And just the best way to say it, typically what I like to use those little gas-powered trimmers that look like a chainsaw, a little bit smaller, super awesome. You get a couple guys running those, and then 3 or 4 guys just carrying brush either to the truck or trailer to take it out to the blind, or better yet, you're brushing your blind right there next to where all your materials are, and then you'll transport the blind out to where you're going to use it. It's the best way to do it. And you want to get too much brush. Because first off, too much typically ends up being almost enough to really get yourself hidden well. Again, not only are you just hiding the material of the blind, you want to really cover up that shooter's slot, that opening there. You know, people that we hunt with dive bomb, you'll go out and you'll see us, and we will kind of make little gaps in our blind. The only reason we're doing that is we're going out there and we're, you know, trying to take pictures and get good video of this kind of stuff, and it's almost impossible to do in a properly brushed A-frame. So for you guys that see that, that is a bad habit of ours, and we're not saying that you should do that. In fact, you should have that shooting area completely blocked up to where you have to stand up through it to get a good clear shot. Okay, that's going to keep you well hidden. That's going to hide your movement. It's going to keep birds from looking in from above and seeing you, and that's really the way you need to brush it up. So the whole thing ought to just look like a pile of bushes or tumbleweeds or whatever you're using. Okay, so brush it really, really well. You shouldn't be able to see any blind material. And when I say get too much, if you actually get too much, that's wonderful, because whether you're hunting a fence line or you're hunting out in the middle of nowhere, the brush shouldn't only be on the blind, you should also have it around you. Fence lines, this is my favorite thing to do with fence lines, especially when we're hunting out of tumbleweeds and we can brush these blinds in really well, is to not only brush the blinds, whether it's 1 blind or 3 blinds or 5 blinds, but also brush the area surrounding it. So I'll run stuff down that fence line, and right next to the blinds it'll be super dark to where light has a hard time getting through. I want to make it look, even if the sun's directly behind my blind, I want to be able to not tell where the edge of that blind is. So I'll be really dense right around the blind, and then I'll taper things off the farther and farther away I get. So as we're doing that, you know, keep that in mind. You can never have too much brush. If you're hunting out in the middle of a field, and I definitely say you can use these things out in the middle of a field. We do it all the time, especially up in Canada, and anywhere you've got well heads or brush piles or little sloughs out in the middle of fields. There's a lot of places where you'll find random patches of grass and bushes. Birds see this all the way from the Arctic Circle down to the bottom of their wintering grounds, so you can get away with it. Don't be too shy. Some days it'll work better than others. That's kind of hunting. So don't shy away from it. Practice it, try it out, and see if you like it. It's a great way to use these blinds. But another way to kind of brush the immediate area is if you've got oak limbs or saplings of any sort in your area, cut those off, and if the ground's soft, you can just sharpen one end of it, stick them in the blind or in the ground adjacent to blind, and that'll break up the outline of it. If you're hunting over harder ground, it's really not too much work to take some big zip ties and some taller pieces of rebar, go in there, bang in you know, a dozen pieces of rebar on either side of the blind, and then zip tie some of this brush to it, or give it something to hold on to. So you're, again, breaking up the footprint of that blind. It'll help you hide really, really well. And that's something I picked up from Duck Commander back when he was doing a seminar. Heck, I couldn't have been more than 12, but he talked about hunting in areas where there's cane, and they'd go stand in the middle of it, and they had a lot of success, but they had more once they were able to start recreating that. They'd take little pieces of PVC, paint it yellow, and even if they're going into the middle of a timber hole in the wide open woods, they'd stick this PVC around them and use it as a blind. You can do the same thing with rebar and natural materials. Break up the edges of that blind, both in front of you, especially behind you, and off to the sides. That's really going to improve your success and change the way that your blinds look in general. Highly, highly recommend that. The basic gist of how to brush these things, think of it as you're looking at it from a 360-degree view. Now, if you're on a fence row or near some power lines especially, birds are going to be less likely to fly directly over you or circle behind you. But, you know, when you're out there in the middle of the field, or if you're on a fence out in the middle of central Kansas and there's nothing else going on, there's nothing at all keeping these birds from working behind you. So make sure you are covered from every single direction to where it can hide not only your movement, but your faces, all your gear that's in there. And keep an eye out from Dive Bomb Industries. We're going to be having something come out here down the road that's going to be pretty awesome. So keep an eye out for something from us, A-frame related, and I think you guys are going to like it. The next thing I want to talk about is decoy setups with A-frames. Always treat an A-frame hunt like an edge hunt. That being said, I would say don't hide your A-frame in your decoy spread. Some guys like to run decoys on both sides of the A-frame. That's fine, whatever you want to do. Everyone's got their preference. Personally, I like to treat it like just another bush in a field, and typically birds won't feed right up to the edge of brush piles because that's where predators are. Coyote could be hiding in there, skunk, raccoon, whatever, and they'll sit a distance off of there. Typically, I like to keep at least 20 yards, if not 25 or 30 yards between the blind and the decoys. You say, man, how do you get close shots if your decoys are 30 yards away? Well, you set it up so the birds are either swinging over the blind or between you and the decoys, or you just have a loose or empty spot right there in front of you that the birds will naturally be drawn to. So, you know, personally, my favorite setup is a crosswind. I love setting up in crosswind scenarios where birds are going to be landing, going either from right to left or left to right, because typically, especially in the case of snow geese, speckled bellies, ducks, and even lessers to a degree, they'll S-curve, all right? So they'll sway back and forth and back and forth, and in those swings are going to come right over that blind, and they're not going to be looking down at you. They're going to be looking over to the other direction at your spread and where they're trying to finish. So I love crosswind setups with A-frames, and you know, typically that's going to be in some sort of a J, where you've got, you know, the blind down here and you've got your big J and maybe a loose area, but you're trying to draw the geese right into that close corner, slightly upwind of your blind, because that's going to keep their eyes off of you. If you're in a setup where you've got the wind coming from your back, that's okay too. They're going to be looking right at you, and you're going to have to be more conscientious of movement and that sort of thing, and making sure the blind is not only covered to hide your movement, but also disguised to blend in with all the surroundings. But that can be great too. I'll go in a really wide V or a wide U or even a T, where you've got, you know, a big group of geese feeding right up to the edge of the field with loose pockets. They're right in front of you where you want these geese to sit, and maybe a couple groups strung off downwind. So depending what you're chasing, depending where you're chasing birds, I like to hunt out of those A-frames and just leave little open spots. Again, unless you're hunting great big Canada geese, I like to use pockets, open little gaps that are, you know, 5 or 10 yards in diameter, that give birds plenty of room to come in. And I like to leave a few of them so the flock, as a big flock comes in, they can kind of filter into these different holes. I've found a lot of success with it. I really enjoy doing it that way, and it's just the way that I like to hunt edges. So whether you're, again, on a fence row or out in the middle of the field, doesn't make much difference. I still like to put some space between myself and the decoys. Now, anytime you put space between the blind and the decoys, you have to be very conscientious of how you call birds. If you're in an area, say we're in that crosswind scenario and geese are coming and they're working, if they work between you and the decoys, if they're somewhere in the middle there and you blow a call, they can tell that the call isn't coming from their left side where the decoys are, but rather from the right side where there's nothing but a bunch of bushes. Well, maybe we ought to inspect those bushes a little bit more closely. Now, I'm not saying you have to be silent when they're between there. You know, if you're hunting lessers and you go from just a million miles an hour to nothing, that obviously sounds like something's got these birds spooked. So, just another thing to keep in mind, when I'm hunting on an edge, I like to use a little less calling, so if I do go quiet when the birds are directly over me or between the decoys and myself, I can go lighter on the calls or completely quiet without alarming the birds. So keep that in mind. They are very good with their situational awareness. They can tell where the calls are coming from versus where the decoys are, and especially like the episode we just covered specklebellies on, man, they will come to a call. So if they hear a call, they will come to a call, and if they can tell that you are not in the spread, it's going to be game over for you. So be very conscientious about that. Even setting up in a quarter wind situation or a downwind where geese are actually coming over the top of you, as long as you're brushed well, you can have a lot of success. And just set up that spread so geese are either going to come off the side of you and then land upwind, or if you've got a quartering headwind for the geese, basically if you can set up any way that the geese aren't looking at you and trying to find you, you're going to have a lot of success. Just kind of keep those things in mind. We're talking about calling, we're talking about keeping your motion limited, and making sure the blind is well brushed. It's going to go a long way, and that's going to really show you a lot of success. So just want to throw another thank you out to Derek King for sending this question in. Derek, make sure you send an email to info@divebombindustries.com. Let them know we used your question. They'll get you a hat sent out, and for anybody else who has a question, go ahead, send it to me directly at Forrest, F-O-R-R-E-S-T, at divebombindustries.com. Not only will I do my best to get it on a future episode here, I'll go ahead, I'll answer any questions you've got in an email. Most of them are coming back a couple paragraphs, if not 5 or 6, depending on how in-depth I can go. But make sure to give me a lot of good information when you send it, mainly your name, your location, where you're from, what you're hunting, and what we're talking about in regards to land type or weather or any of that. Just give me as many details as you can. That way I can give you the best answer I can. And again, none of this stuff is ever going to be black and white. This works 100% of the time or none of the time. This is all just experience compiled from myself, things I've been taught from other people, and a lot of the tips and tricks that I've been shown throughout traveling across the country, meeting a lot of these wonderful outfitters that go out here and do it for a living. So take it all with a grain of salt, but we're going to do our best to answer any questions we have or any questions you have. So thanks again for tuning in for another episode of Field Facts with Forrest, and make sure to like and subscribe down below. That way you don't miss any more in the future, and we'll catch you next time.